Barnacles, nature's tiny, stubborn architects. These little creatures are basically the squatters of the ocean, latching onto anything they can, rocks, ships, whales, even sea turtles. And they don't just sit there, they build these crazy, super hard shells that make them a nightmare for boat owners but a dream for 3D artists who love organic details. Welcome to my barnacle modeling time-lapse. Before we dive in, here's a quick tip: reference images are your best friend. Whether you snap your own photos or gather them online, having good references makes all the difference. Okay, let's build the foundation. I'm starting with classic polygonal modeling, nothing fancy, just good, clean geometry. And here's the deal: if you get the base right, everything else will be way easier. I'm keeping everything in quads, because quads are predictable, like a well-behaved pet. Triangles. More like a wild raccoon. They might look fine at first, but later, they'll mess up your topology and steal your snacks. So, quads it is. To shape the barnacle, I'm using simple but effective techniques, extruding to pull out new geometry, adding loop cuts for extra detail, and filling in gaps where needed. It's all about keeping the mesh clean and manageable, so when we get to sculpting, it won't turn into a nightmare. Now that the geometry is solid, it's time to unwrap this thing, literally. UV mapping is like packing a suitcase. You want to lay everything out neatly so there's no unnecessary stretching, overlapping, or weird surprises when you apply textures. First, I place my seams carefully. Think of seams like zippers on a jacket, put them in the right places, and everything opens up nicely. Put them in the wrong places, and well, let's just say your model might end up looking like it had a bad day at the laundromat. Once the seams are set, I check for overlapping UVs by using Select Overlap. Now, I scale and arrange the islands to make sure they use as reasonable texture space. And of course, I keep an eye on stretching. A stretched UV island means stretched textures, and stretched textures mean, well, your barnacle will look like it's melting. Not exactly the look we're going for. With the UVs done, it's time to add some real detail. For that, I'm using the multi-resolution modifier. This allows me to sculpt high-resolution details while keeping the base mesh low poly and efficient. Unlike Dintopo, multi-res preserves the original topology, so my UVs remain intact. When sculpting, I use various brushes, but I rely mostly on draw, inflate, and crease. The draw brush helps build up forms, inflate pushes areas outward to give volume, and crease is perfect for adding sharp ridges and cracks. Of course, I adjust my workflow depending on the details I need, switching to other brushes as necessary. I'm also using a graphics tablet, which makes a big difference. Pressure sensitivity allows for much finer control over brush strokes, making details look more organic. While sculpting with a mouse is possible, it requires frequent manual adjustments to brush strength and size, which can slow things down. Now that the sculpting is done, it's time to refine the shading. To emphasize depth and fine details, I use the geometry pointiness attribute. This helps create a procedural effect that highlights edges and cavities, making the barnacle's surface look more natural. However, pointiness can sometimes produce unwanted artifacts, especially on small-scale objects. A simple fix is to temporarily scale up the object, which often reduces or removes these issues. But if I'm planning to bake textures, I keep the object at this larger size until the baking is done. Scaling it down too soon can mess with baked details. Once everything is baked and finalized, I scale it back down to its correct size, unless, of course, I'm aiming for a barnacle the size of a space station. Which, to be fair, might be a cool sci-fi concept, but as far as I know, Earth barnacles don't come in XXL. With the sculpting and base shading done, it's time to set up the PBR shader. I start layering colors and textures to create a detailed color map, roughness map, and normal map. The key is to get a natural look with good variation, so the surface doesn't feel too uniform. For added realism, I sometimes mix in textures that aren't directly related to the object. Like in this case, I've borrowed details from a mossy rock texture. It adds extra organic depth, making the barnacle look more weathered and integrated into its environment. Since the shader is mostly procedural, I can reuse the same material on the new variant. That saves a ton of time while keeping the look consistent. Plus, with just a few tweaks, I now have a second barnacle, ready to be placed in the scene. Now I'm modeling another barnacle. The process is pretty much the same as the first one, so I'll speed it up with a quick time-lapse. Now comes the fun part, placing the barnacles on the rock. I do this manually because I enjoy taking the time to position each one just right. It's like a mini puzzle, and I love getting into the details. But if you're looking to speed things up, you can always use particles to distribute the barnacles across the surface, or even try geometry nodes for more control and randomness. These methods work great if you need to cover a large area quickly. In this case, though, I'm placing each barnacle by hand to make sure everything looks exactly how I want it. It's a slower process, but it's satisfying to have that level of control. I start with simple polygonal modeling to create the beam. I use basic shapes and then apply a texture that combines wood and green, organic details to make the beam look weathered and natural. After that, just like with the rock, I manually place each barnacle. I try to position them so that each barnacle feels like it belongs to the surface and fits naturally within the scene. And that wraps up the barnacle creation process. But before I go, I'd love to know your thoughts. Which part of the process did you find most interesting? What would you like to see more of in the future? Feel free to leave a comment below with your ideas. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss future updates. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. You can purchase the professional 3D models used in these animations. Links will be in the description.